Fortunately, Canada has taken responsible decisions over past many years to have one of the best balance sheets in the G7. We have been making sure that we have money aside for a rainy day. Well, it's raining, and we are now able to invest in Canadians, to support Canadians as we make the difficult decisions needed to get through this and come back stronger than ever before.
Hi there and welcome to Power and Politics. I'm Vashi Capellos. The Fed's announced more details today on emergency measures for businesses affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, including some specifics on who's eligible for that 75% wage subsidy unveiled last week. Here's who qualifies. Any business that has suffered a revenue drop of at least 30% in the wake of this pandemic. And the number of employees, the size of the business, won't be a qualifying factor. This applies to all businesses, big and small, and that includes nonprofits and charities as well. How much money are we talking? The government will cover up to 75% on the first $700 of their employees' incomes, or up to $847 a week for 3 months. There are still some things we don't know, like who gets the full 75% subsidy or who gets less, or how the government will measure that 30% drop in revenues over what amount of time. We also don't know how much this will all cost the federal treasury. Let's bring MPs into the conversation on those points. Sean Fraser is the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance. He joins us from Halifax. James Cumming is the Conservative small business and export promotion critic. He's in Edmonton. And Gord Johns is the NDP's small business critic. He's in Port Alberni, BC today. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having us, Vashi.
Mr. Fraser, I'll start with you. How will the government measure that 30% decline in revenues?
So before I get into the details, I want to say that over the past week, we've been listening to a lot of our stakeholders, including businesses in my own community, who've said that it's great that you've advanced measures to help make sure families can keep food on the table, but we want to make sure they have a place to come to work at the end of this public health emergency. That's why we've introduced this new wage subsidy at 75%, as you pointed out, up to $58,700 for businesses who've lost revenue of 30%. There's a couple final decisions that need to be finally honed. I expect that you'll have more detail on the specific qualification requirements during Minister Morneau's appearance in the media tomorrow.
So you don't know at this point, or the government is not releasing at this point, basically over what period of time? I'm asking because we got a lot of questions today about that 30%. Is this over a certain amount of months compared to what period last year, that kind of thing? You don't have that answer at this point, is what you're saying.
At this time, no, only because there's certain details that need to be firmed up. You can imagine that, for example, seasonal industries may require a different time horizon to consider for a loss of revenue, which they're accustomed to experiencing once a year, as compared to someone who might have a consistent revenue stream month over month. So there's some final details that we're firming up, but within the next day or so, you should have clarity on that specific issue.
Mr. Cumming, the Conservatives, along with other opposition parties and business organizations, had asked for this increase. The federal government's initial announcement was a 10% wage subsidy. On Friday, they upped that to 75%. Is this program what you were looking for?
Well, I'll give them an A for announcements and an F for delivery, because the problem with every announcement that we're getting, it lacks detail. And so this is businesses, the phone rings off the hook saying, do I qualify? Do I qualify? In general, I think that's what we're asking for 75%. But then there's, how's that revenue calculated? Take here in Alberta, where the revenues have dropped significantly because of the price of oil. And it may not be directly related to COVID, but they still have a significant drop in revenue. What about the small businesses that they declare dividends? It may be a small shop that uses dividends as their income rather than a salary. So there's more questions than answers, but in general, the idea behind raising the subsidy up, we think, is the right direction.
Mr. Johns, I know that your party has specifically written a letter to the Prime Minister asking the federal government to go beyond the subsidy. Your party also asked for the increase in the wage subsidy, but to go beyond and look at rents. And that's something we've heard a lot of from small businesses as well. What exactly are you looking to Ottawa to do there?
Well, first, we're actually we're grateful that the government worked with us, listened to small business, worked with labor and small business leaders to adjust their initial rollout for their wage subsidy, which was 10% to 75%. But we are looking for the details now. A lot of businesses are contacting us. They've got a lot of questions. We want to make sure that they're getting the answers that they need so they can either rehire the staff that they've let go or keep the staff on in their organization. But number one, what they need is the money to roll out the door. Rent is coming up for many leaseholders coming up on April 1st, and they don't know how they're going to pay their lease, and they don't know how they're going to meet payroll. So, right now, that's the number one priority, is getting the government to get the money out the door and look at more ways that they can be flexible on their rollout of their programs to support small business and make sure that we're keeping our number one job creators and protecting those workers. And that's their number one priority for small business people, is their workers. It's their second family.
Mr. Fraser, let me ask you a question about cash flow, because with the CERB, which of course for our viewers is the announcement your government also made last week targeting people who have lost their jobs and others who can't work because of COVID-19. We are told that the application's open April 6th, something around there, and then we're looking at a 10-day window before people can get money. Do you have any information for business owners watching now about how fast this cash might come?
I think some of those details will be made available at the same time when Minister Morneau addresses it publicly. The mechanism that we're looking at for some of the, not just the wage subsidy, but the small business loans, is to go through existing financial institutions. To build on Mr. John's point, and I appreciate his commentary, the goal here was to target individuals or businesses who are going to be facing a short-term crunch, and to identify which way through existing mechanisms we could get that money out the door as quick as possible. By dealing with financial institutions with whom small businesses typically are familiar in their own community, we're able to provide a shortcut that avoids the need to set up an unnecessary bureaucratic process that would have a lengthy application and extend the time for delivery.
What about,
so our priority right now is to get money in the hands of people as quick as possible.
Let me follow up with that quickly, because I also am inundated with messages from people who own and run businesses about this is, many of whom welcome this news, but who also, I just want to read you one message. The 75% wage is great news and much needed for employees, much better than EI, but it's a flow through for us when we are fully shut down. This unfortunately does not assist with rent and now puts us in the awkward position of deciding if we should try and reopen in order to get some cash flow, but risk a fine if we're unable to abide by the distancing restrictions and put our staff at risk. What should I do? Specifically, Mr. Fraser, my question is on rent and what role the federal government can play here.
So there's a number of different things that we have done and could do. Before I sort of outline them quickly, I want to point out that there are certain jurisdictional challenges when you're dealing with renters. We want to extend support to the people who need to make those payments, but we do recognize that provincial jurisdiction often comes into play when you're dealing with the relationship between landlords and tenants. That's why we've put measures in place, not only like a wage subsidy to help with the operating costs of keeping employees paid, but also the new small business loan program, which is interest-free, fully paid for and guaranteed by the federal government. It's also why we've extended the requirement to remit certain monies owed to the federal government, whether it's the extension of the tax filing or the extension to the need to remit HST or GST contributions. We recognize right now that cash flow is going to be a real problem, and we're implementing whatever measures we can to make sure at a low cost to the business owner, they have the means to keep the doors open and hopefully maintain that essential connection between workers and their jobs, so we can press the reset button more quickly once we come out the back end of this pandemic. Mr.
Cumming, I wanted to ask you about something one of your colleagues in Alberta, Michelle Rempel, raised today, and that's the business development loans that Mr. Fraser just highlighted. She said that according to the website, businesses that have been deemed ineligible to apply for that loan are those which are quote unquote inconsistent with generally accepted community standards of conduct and propriety, including things like bars, casinos, lounges, pool and billiard halls. What is it that you want the government to do here, Mr. Cumming?
Well, I think on the Business Development Bank, I think what she was getting at was why exclude those organizations when they were shut down. So they have absolutely no income. So for them to be able to fire up again and be able to pay their rent, they need access to capital. A lot of what the program we've seen so far has been deferrals. So deferral on taxes, deferrals on utilities, loans, which eventually you have to pay all this back. So you get to a point where these businesses, even if and when they can reopen, which we don't know what the timetable would be, they're going to be deferring most of their payments along with taking on more debt, and particular to the BDC debt, that it's at a fairly high rate because it's described as a secondary lender. So I think the point she's getting, why not those organizations? Because they're the ones that have been shut down because of the virus.
Mr. Johns, I want to get you in one quick second. Mr. Fraser, I just want to put really quickly to you, why not include those businesses?
Well, look, BDC is going to make certain decisions that they feel are appropriate, but I'll reiterate a point that Mr. Cummings just made, that they are a secondary lender. The first stop for any small business in Canadian communities should be to their primary lender.
I know, but with respect, Mr. Fraser, I'm sure you're being inundated with people who are also trying to get in touch with their bank, having so much difficulty doing so, and being told they can defer their mortgage, but they'll be penalized for doing so.
Certainly, and that's why we're putting new measures in place, like the new small business loan program that'll be fully guaranteed by the federal government and paid for by the federal government.
But then they can't access that. That's what we were just saying, right? Then those businesses like bars and clubs can't access that.
Yeah, and there's certainly bars and restaurants who are going to need support as well. And I've got a large cannabis production facility just 10 minutes from where I'm seated now that's going to need support. We're going to continue to look for ways to make sure that at the end of the day, as many workers as possible can have faith that their job is still going to be there for them at the end of this health crisis.
Mr. Johns, last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. They need to relax those barriers. Right now, we're all in this together. When there's businesses like a microbrewery in my riding that can't access capital that just started up, we need to make sure that they can get through this. Jenny Kwan, the MP for Vancouver Island East, and I wrote a letter this week calling on the government to relax that and ensure that we're making sure that nobody falls through the cracks right now. And, I talked to Minister Ng this morning about that as well and plead to her to take a look at that, and also to take a look at other jurisdictions like Australia, where they've relaxed or they've helped people, leaseholders, up to $10,000 in their country a month, to especially right now with the April 1st deadline coming fast approaching for many businesses, and their lease payments are due. They're looking at ways to help support them, just like the wage subsidy. We saw the government and we cited Denmark and Ireland and Great Britain. We're glad to see them adjust their rollout. So we're hoping they'll continue to work with us, to work with small business and workers, and make sure that we protect those jobs that are absolutely critical to us getting out of this at the end of the day.
Okay, I'm out of time. I have to leave it there, but I want to thank all three of you for your time this evening. Thanks to Sean Fraser, James Cumming, and Gord Johns.
If you work for a company that has been impacted by COVID-19, the government will cover up to 75% of your salary on the first $58,700 that you earn. That means up to $847 a week. As I mentioned on Friday, this will be backdated to March 15th.
New details, as you heard there today, from the government on their wage subsidy plan to help businesses retain staff. All businesses that see a 30% drop in revenue will qualify. There doesn't appear to be a cap on the number of employees, and that could mean more than $800 a week for those employees. So how are small businesses reacting to those details? Mark Lamming is the co-owner of Purebread, a bakery based in Whistler, BC, where he joins us from now. And Sean McVeigh is the owner of Small Pony Barrel Works Brewery, just outside of Ottawa, and that's where he joins us from. Hi, guys. Nice to see you. Thanks for making time.
Nice.
Sean, why don't I start with you? Tell me the situation for your business right now. What's happened since the outbreak of this pandemic?
Right. So since this began, I guess we're taking it one day at a time here. Obviously, the order came down to start closing public spaces. So we have a tasting room here at our brewery that we had to close, and we've had to shift some of our business to online sales and home delivery a bit more, and that's kind of helping out. But with our bar and restaurant customers all closed, it's, things are a little tighter now. That could have been like 30 or 40% of our revenue in a month would come from those restaurants. And now that they've all forced to shut down, we're not sure when they're going to be back up and running, or even if some of them will be back up, or if even beer that we've sent to them might have to be sent back. So there's still quite a lot of unknowns and a lot of sort of things up in the air right now.
And Mark, you've had to close your bakery, right?
Yeah, we have 5 bakeries in total, 2 in Whistler and 3 in Vancouver, and we have made the decision based on the public health officials' recommendations to close. We can't really guarantee in our bakeries in the tight conditions in the back that we are able to maintain the 2-meter requirement for staff distancing, and really don't want to put our staff in the position of having to leave home, which they've been told they shouldn't do unless necessary, and then taking public transport or any other ways of coming into work and possibly contracting the virus and then taking it home or giving it to customers.
And so let me just quickly follow up with you, Mark, because we've been talking on social media about how the announcements that have come from the government so far might impact your business. And specifically, do you think this wage subsidy right now at 75% will make a difference for you?
With us being completely closed, it's really a flow through. I think it's a good thing that the government is subsidizing employees up to 75%. But unfortunately for us as a business owner, it's just a straight flow through. And we're not generating any revenue at all. So we're still on the hook for close to $50,000 worth of rental revenue in 2 days' time. Unless we can come to some negotiation with our landlords. And landlords are also in the difficult position of not having any relief on their side also.
Sean, what about you? You've heard the government's announcement where the wage subsidy is concerned today. Will that have an impact on your business?
Yes, I hope it does. When the original announcement came out at 10% subsidies, that was, kind of good news, but not enough. We ended up having to send staff home, temporarily laying people off. And, now they're on EI, which could be only about 55% of their wage. And we even talked about, is there a way for you to come in maybe 2 or 3 days a week, but then we're only going to be paying you the same that EI would pay you. So finally hearing that the government will be putting more money into that relief measure is very good news for us. I guess the new detail that's out today, though, is that we're going to have to, it's going to be applicable to businesses that have shown about a 30% drop in their revenues, and we're still coming out of our slow season, so trying to figure out where we stand is going to be a little challenge, but we'll eventually get there.
Yeah, I wanted to check in just on that, actually, if you don't mind me following up with you, Sean, because the one detail that we don't know, the Prime Minister did say, for example, that it has to be a 30% drop, but we don't know over what period or how they're going to measure that exactly yet. How difficult do you think that might be?
Well, I mean, coming out of my year end, I do my books, at the end of the year, so I have good visibility. Month to month, it kind of accumulates. I could look at year over year and find out if we're down this year, but month over month, it's a little tough right now because when we had to close our tap room and the restaurants closed, we did this promotion where we would send beer to people's houses or offer free shipping in Ontario, and that's, there's an expense behind that. But there was also like a huge uptick in business right when we announced that, and all the way up until about last Tuesday, sort of the 11th hour before they were going to decide which businesses were essential and could remain open. I think we saw a large influx of orders online at that point, but that is sort of starting to taper off, and I'm more concerned about what is June going to look like as things really sink in and things deepen and people, money tightens up for everybody.
Mark, you mentioned rent. Do you think there's a role? I mean, it sounds to me like the provincial government in BC has talked about freezing rents, has talked about evictions, but do you think there's a role for the federal government here to talk more about the suspension of rent or help with mortgages on the landlord side of things? What do you think?
I think there is an opportunity to help on both sides. I mean, landlords and tenants are in this together. If the landlords don't get paid rent, they're at jeopardy. If we're continued to required to pay full rent with no revenue, a vast majority of small businesses won't last more than 2 or 3 months. I think we need to get the support to survive. I agree with the 75% wage subsidy, which I think is great, but if we have 25 to 50% of small businesses going under because they can't cash flow through these difficult times, then unfortunately employees won't have jobs to go back to. So I can keep paying my employees, but if I'm unable to reopen, at a point when maybe I get deferred rent, that rent gets piled on after 6 months or 5 months, and I've got decreased sales but now increased costs, it's really just delaying the problem.
Sean, I think there are a lot of people watching who can identify and relate with what both of you are saying. How are you doing? This is I am inundated with messages from people who run businesses who are incredibly stressed out right now, and understandably so. How are you doing?
Well, I'm kind of going into survival mode a little bit almost. It kind of harkens back to when you start a small business. I mean, I started this business maybe just 3.5 years ago, and when you start, you're doing all the work yourself. So I've spent the last 2 weeks kind of in a blur, running deliveries around town, coming in, doing everything myself. So that's good, and the cash flow is there for that. But nothing else is getting done. So I've had to ask some employees. At least one employee has come back to start doing some work under the assumption that wage subsidy will be there. But I have another employee who he won't leave his house right now because of concerns, obviously, and safety. And one of my other employees who was helping me out doing some of these deliveries, after one day of doing the deliveries, because it's there's a bit of risk in going door to door to people's houses or even into an apartment building.
Right.
She was a little concerned about doing that again in the future. So there is work to do. I'm doing most of it myself right now, and I'm sure a lot of small business owners are finding themselves in a similar situation. But hopefully the details of these programs, plus all the loan relief we've seen from the banks, those are going to help a lot. So I think it's kind of a bit of a waiting game right now.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I really want to tell you both how much I appreciate you making time for us this evening, and we are wishing both of you the best during this really stressful time. Thanks to Mark Lamming, co-owner of Purebred, a bakery based in Whistler, and Sean McVeigh, owner of Small Pony Barrel Works here in Ottawa. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.